Hi, and welcome to this episode of People Are Animals Too, Darn It. I'm your host, Mandy Evans, and today we have Dr. Wassif joining us. Dr. Wassif is a licensed psychologist by the Board of Psychology in the state of Idaho. He received his bachelor's degree in recreational therapy from the Pennsylvania State University, a master's degree in education from the University of Georgia, a second master's degree in counseling from West Virginia University, which is where he completed his doctorate in psychology in 2014. He has over 14 years of experience working in outpatient, residential, and hospital settings, having treated multiple adolescents and adults in areas of depression, anxiety, personality disorders, ADHD, trauma, mood deregulation, and life transitions. In the past 5 years, he's made a greater effort to expand his clinical specialty to family therapy to more appropriately address individual needs within a larger system. Welcome, Dr. Wassif. I'm so happy that you're able to join me today on our podcast called People Are Animals Too, Darn It.
I do love that title, actually. Did you come up with that?
No, I'm not that good. There was a friend of mine that I said, we're thinking about doing a podcast, and it would be about, supporting people, and he came up with it.
I think it's good.
So do you think you can start us out just by saying, the career you've chosen is a pretty lengthy commitment to get to where you are today, and can you tell us a little bit about why you chose this profession?
Sure. It's a windy road. Becoming a psychologist was not one of those things that, from a young age, I was like, I'm going to grow up and be a psychologist. I actually did everything I could for a long time to not become a psychologist, if I'm being totally transparent, because my sister, who is 7 years older, is a psychologist.
Oh.
And, sibling rivalry and all those things, which, led me to, veer away from mental health. But there was this constant draw. I ended up, for a variety of different paths in my life, it just got further and further into, the mental health arena. And what's not, it is exciting, understanding the human mind, understanding people's behaviors, and how to lead a healthy, functional life. Who isn't, at least a little bit interested in, and how do I become the healthiest person I can be? So it really began when I was in my undergrad, and I was a backcountry, river rat and backcountry field guide, and actually got my undergrad in outdoor education, right? And recreational therapy, and the idea of trying to bring people that wouldn't normally be able to experience adventure-based kinds of activities into the backcountry. So I worked for a company called Wilderness Inquiry for a while, which they're up in the boundary waters of Minnesota, and we would bring people with disabilities way deep into the backcountry via water, right? Because canoes are a great equalizer for people's abilities, as long as you have some degree of upper body strength. And so, but by virtue of those kinds of experiences, it just took me closer and closer to starting to work with adolescents in a wilderness therapy capacity, and you can see over the course of time I'm getting closer and closer to mental health. And after getting a master's degree at the University of Georgia, I ended up working for this program called Second Nature Wilderness Program, and just started being really mentored by other psychologists that, you got a knack for this, I encourage you to go on. And I ended up being mentored by 3 different people at different points in my life that were all pointing me in the same direction. And eventually I ended up going and getting my doctorate and just loving it. But taking those experiences, those experiential activities, and continue to try to apply them today.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Hence probably why we're talking about this, right?
Yeah.
Some alternative ways to increase people's health.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting and very interesting how I'm reading a book called Grit right now.
Yeah, it's a great. Yeah.
It talks about this idea that people feel, this false idea that people feel like their calling will be something they'll know early on, where you have all these people that are end up in college and still don't know, and that it really requires experimentation, and that you can kind of go through and you find somewhat a common thread that takes you into direction.
Yeah.
It's actually just recognizing the common thread.
Yeah.
So I always loved animals,
Yeah.
and wanted to be a vet, and then decided that that was not. I didn't like school, so I figured you couldn't really go be a vet if you didn't like school. So today, what I'm hoping we can talk about is connection. So connection in terms of really just anything, animals, people, just the power of connection.
Yeah.
So first, can you tell us basically your definition of what connection means?
Oh, that's a good question. It should be a simple answer, but it probably would take me a couple tries to get this one right. When I think of connection, I think about both from sort of a behavioral and an affect experience, right? Connection meaning like, from an emotional side, like how do I feel? What happens to me internally when I sit with somebody, when I speak with somebody that I want to be around, or when I find myself getting closer to that person? What happens internally to let me know, both cognitively and emotionally, like, hey, this is a good experience, and I want to see this person again, or as it relates to pets, I want to be around my pet, my dog. But then behaviorally, what do I do? Do I seek this person out? Do I send a message? What lets me know that this person is maybe more important to me, and so that I want to make sure I foster that relationship that much more.
And do you think that you can have connection without vulnerability?
I'm sure there are gradients, right, to all these things. It's not a binary experience of connection or no connection. I would imagine that the degree of connection is related to the degree of vulnerability that you can have, like a coworker. Right? Like, there isn't a whole lot of vulnerability, with the exception of when we have to help each other out, and pick up the ball. But there isn't a lot of vulnerability there, but there is a connection.
Yeah.
Right. There's not intentional vulnerability anyway. But I can imagine that in my closest of relationships there is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. No, I think that's I'm just, all of a sudden it popped in my head that there are prisoners that feel a deep connection with the people, what are they called? The guards.
Yeah.
And those guards, in some sense, are seeing them in their most vulnerable state. And I wonder if, because they have to rely on them so much, if that creates that kind of connection, that becomes their people. I don't know, because I think it was Brene Brown, and I'm going to mess this up, but said that everybody in life is seeking, that when we meet with people in a group, we're seeking to find those that are vulnerable, and yet we as people protect our vulnerability more than anything else.
Sure.
And it's so interesting to me, because that's like this connection that people have with their pets. And they say that my pet doesn't judge me, doesn't yell at me, is waiting at the door, is excited to see me. It almost all comes down to the fact that you can be your truest self in front of your dog, and your dog won't judge you.
Yeah.
Isn't that showing a sense of vulnerability, that you're being your best self, or your most open, or maybe your worst self in front of?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things I love about like my dog, or any dog really, is they don't care, right? Like, and part of that is vulnerability, but I would also argue that there's another part of it, which is just Carl Rogers, one of positive psychology, and and really a lot of the groundwork of mental health is due to Carl Rogers, and one of his big tenets was unconditional positive regard, right? Like as clinicians, that's one of the key factors that no matter what a person, no matter how they show up, that we have positive regard for this individual, right? And that is just exemplified in our pets, right?
Yeah.
At least the pets that I've owned, my dog, like every time I get to the door, she's just, wiggling and so excited. Doesn't matter what happened a moment before. There's that unconditional positive regard.
So with Carl Rogers and the unconditional positive or just positive regard, is that for saying that you as a therapist or as a clinician are greeting your patients in that way?
Yeah, that we see them, right? So client-centered approach. That's or person-centered approach. That's Carl Rogers' big gift to the world of psychology, and that one of the key tenets is that we don't judge our clients as like they're bad people. They might make unhealthy decisions or decisions that either harm themselves or other people.
Right.
But at the core, there's goodness in all of us. Right?
Yeah, so positive intention there.
Right.
I think this is really interesting because a lot of what we talk about at our shelter is that we always set our rules based on the exception, with the assumption that everybody coming to us is in some way bad. But for us, we're like, no, we're going to assume everyone coming to us has positive intentions and that they're good.
Right.
And the change that's happened within our relationship to our community has been so significant.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to look up Carl Rogers and read some of his stuff.
Oh, yeah, I think it would be
amazing.
directly applicable. I think you'll find like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Another I think key tenet that I've tried to incorporate in a lot of my work with clients is needs theory. Like a lot of people have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but he's probably one of the most famous. But there are a number of other ones, and if we can think about human behavior from the perspective of we're all just trying to get a need met,
right.
I use William Glasser a lot, and he has 5 core needs, right? So love and belonging, power and control, freedom, fun, and I'm blanking on one because there's a camera right over there.
But you will always blank on one. That's my theory.
Safety. There it is.
Okay.
There you go. You can argue that a decision, again, is healthy or unhealthy, but we're all just trying to get a need met, right? And so if we can think about people's behaviors from the aspect of, from that lens, the intent is usually for some kind of greater purpose. It just may not be through the healthier mean.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So back to the idea of connection. Mm-hmm. I think what I see is that we have people who seek connection, and sometimes not in a positive way. Like people, but the idea is they want to have meaning in their life through connections. So it could be their animals, there could be people. And I do all my best thinking in the shower, which is giving myself pretty high regard on my best thinking. But I was thinking this morning that connections in some ways, like I'm just trying to think of an analogy, like a sun, right? And we have these rays, and all these rays are the connections we have in our lives. But for some people, those connections can not be as many as others. Some people have a tremendous amount of people in their lives that they're connected with. But for some people, they may only have those kind of, what would they be called? Like, the person at the grocery store that they see regularly, and to them, that's a connection. Or it could be a pet. What happens to people if they don't have that large... Someone did it as a stool, that if you only have one prong on your stool, it will be hard to keep steady. But the more that you have, the more steady you'll be.
Sure.
And then if somebody misses one, let's say a pet dies or a family member dies, and they have all those connections that are all there, then they're pretty good. They're still going to remain fairly stable. But there are people that don't have that many legs on their stool, and if they lose somebody, then how does that affect a person?
Well, I think that's a complex question.
I'm full of
and
them.
you're great at firing these great questions. I would argue that the quality of the relationships probably matter more than the quantity for a lot of people, but everybody's different.
Yeah.
You know? And for I know several people. I'm an extrovert myself, so I can spend all day at work talking to people, and then go home, and then want to keep going.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a lot of people that aren't like that, and neither are right or wrong, good or bad. It's just how are we getting our needs met?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And at the same time, I think your point is valid in that if we're putting all our eggs in one basket, that leaves us vulnerable, right? For if that relationship is ruptured, what then, right? And that's where issues of codependence sometimes can come from. But in general, that just leaves a person at risk. I'm not 100% sure if I answered your
No, but
question.
I think it's interesting because if you looked at, let's say that there's an individual that has, and we've talked about this before, like an individual that struggles with social interactions but has the best dog in the world.
Yeah.
And that dog ends up dying.
Yeah.
Or the dog ends up locked up in a shelter and that individual doesn't have the wherewithal to come retrieve the dog, whatever. That is an extremely meaningful loss to that individual.
Absolutely. And
so in sheltering, a common theme that we've had in the podcast is that sometimes we, in order and the sake of protecting an animal, we diminish that connection. So if you can't afford to come get your pet, or let's say that you're a raving maniac, mad, angry, I should say, coming in to get your pet because you really do have some struggles with how to interact with people, and that shelter decides to not give you your pet back, that impact is far bigger than what any of those people at the shelter would ever imagine.
Yeah, I absolutely, and it makes me think of one person in particular that I'm working with, or actually a couple, but one in particular, that I think her closest connections are her dog and her cat.
Yeah,
I think she would agree with that, and they are as meaningful to her as anyone possibly could be. And when we talk about things like safety and future orientation and what keeps a person going, this person's pets at times have been the only thing that kept her going, and obviously she's in a much better place today. But those relationships absolutely are incredibly important. My dog to me is incredibly important, and when we lost our last dog, Sage, he when I came home and the house was just quiet, like, oh my gosh, it was deafening, and to be greeted at the door without that like little wiggle, and those relationships, I appreciate you taking that perspective that if we're not careful, we can demean them, and they mean a whole lot to us.
Yeah, well, we talk about also that we as animal lovers care so much about that connection, but we're the quickest to diminish it. So, and I wanted to talk to you today also about this idea of why do we do this as humans, when if we just looked at parenting, we love our children so much, and as a society I think care about children, but yet if it's a situation that we are not necessarily directly associated with, we won't feel that person has the same connection. Does that make sense? Like, in Syria or somewhere where families are hurting.
Oh yeah.
We don't share the same empathy.
Self-attribution theory refers to basically when we don't give the other people the same courtesies that we give to ourselves. Okay. So, for instance, if somebody else does something negative that we have judgment about, or we perceive it to be negative for some reason, we're going to say that's them.
Right.
They're a bad person, or they are flaky, or whatever.
Right.
But when we engage in the same kinds of behaviors, it's because it's a situational kind of experience, right? Like, oh, I was just running late because my kid was sick that day,
right? As
opposed to I'm flaky, So we internally have this bias
towards ourselves,
towards others.
Oh, okay, right.
Or ourselves, okay. Right? So self-attribution. And we do it all the time. This is social psychology, and the boils down to like the in-group versus the out-group, and how do I judge who's in my inner circle versus outer. And we do this all the time. And I can totally see how we put pets, when convenient, in a different category.
Yeah, and I find it interesting because everybody does it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But we naturally do it. Like, no one's thinking about it. It's like, why do we go towards the negative generally instead of the positive?
Yeah, you're taking me back to my grad school days and theory and everything else, and it's survival. I think there's a lot of evolutionary aspects too. If we are on guard for things that are going to hurt us,
so we assume the worst, like that noise was a bear,
right,
rather than it was just the wind.
Right.
Okay.
So if we're on guard for things that could emotionally hurt us, physically hurt us, then we're more likely to survive, right? Mm-hmm. So if we think negatively, then we can avoid these situations. Unfortunately, a lot of the times they're not true, right? Or there are aspects of them that have been overemphasized, and then therefore create barriers between people or situations or pets. But I think it's a survival instinct.
Yeah. Well, media doesn't do us any good with negative stories. Always end up coming to the top. I know that I will watch something, and that day I might be on guard all day over something I watched. It would be amazing if there was a lot more positive, uplifting, fun, wonderful stories out there that could be shared, so that we're not always thinking that the bad is reality. Because what we see in our everyday is that it's not. It's like one of my team members, her car went off the edge of the road, and this man came up to her and said, do you want to leave your keys with me, and I'll try to get your car out of the ditch? And we're talking in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And she said, okay. And when she got home that night, he had pulled her car out, and she called me to own the fact that she was judgmental, that she would have never approached this gentleman normally. She told me about all the different aspects of it, that she had judgment, and realizing that she had work to do.
Yeah.
But it's she said, I know you're going to love this story, Mandy, because we allow ourselves at the shelter to challenge each other where there's no judgment. So her calling talked about that was like almost therapy for her to get it out.
Right.
To own the fact that we all struggle with it. Like, I know I'll see people and I have a judgment, but I'm more aware now, and so that's what we're trying to do, is create awareness so people can just question your inner thinking. Why is it this way? And then I read somewhere, I wish I could find it, I tried looking it up this morning, that the most important factor to a long life is connection. So people that have lived up into their hundreds, and they're part of a small village, and everybody cares about them, and they feel that love and support. There's a book, it's The Happiness Factor. I'll have to look it up.
Sure.
I'll put it on a link on the podcast. But he said that when we have a connection with people, we are happier and then we're calmer. So we're our best selves when we feel that way. And I find it interesting that I wish more people recognized that connection and being a community really builds the best out of all of us. I get all my neuroscience from Brain Games on Disney Plus. Have you seen it?
No.
It's really good. Yeah. Anyway, and they did this electrode on a brain, and it showed couples, and the couple that laughed together the most were the most on the same wavelength. And we try to laugh a lot. I know that you laugh a lot. But I think it's fun that we have an environment. Well, we know this, right? We know that if you laugh together, you're going to build potentially a connection. It might just be fleeting, but hopefully it's not laughing at someone.
Right.
I laugh a lot. People at work tease me because I laugh at my own jokes, but whatever. It's good. So when we know that connection is meaningful, that when we feel our best selves, when we're the most, I guess, in line with each other, why do we have, again, this goes back to your basic knowledge of evolution, but why do we feel that the most powerful people, or why are we attracted to powerful people that are angry or that yell a lot, or that use punitive measures instead of influence to make things happen?
You're making it so hard to stay away from politics in some of these comments, but I will say, fear is a great motivator. It's an incredible motivator, right? If I can create this sense of us versus them, and them are the ones to be feared, and I'm going to be the one to protect you from them, then you're going to support me, right? And we can rally against a common foe, right? And that's a really powerful motivator, right? Incredibly powerful, maybe more so than most other emotions that I have seen that I work with on a day-to-day basis. I think there's a lot more good out there in the world, and I wish we would, as a society and as a race, would strive for the good and lending a hand and supporting each other through values as opposed to emotions. But I deal with it every day, people making decisions based on emotions, and more often than not, it's fear.
Yeah. And I'm a fear expert, just personally. Yeah. But I think that one of the best things you can do is you challenge your fear, right? Like you say, I'm scared to leave the house, so I'm going to leave the house. Sure. And that when you lean into it a little bit. But when I talk to my children about this, I say that doesn't mean that you jump out of the airplane. Right. Because that's too scary.
Right, yeah, flooding's not good.
Let's just, a little bit. Yeah. And I think a lot of the challenges we have in our world are based on this idea, the fear. But even not going on the greater, I'm trying to make a correlation, but with punitive measures even locally, and you're when you're panhandling, let's say, and you're not allowed to, and the way that they enforce that is through giving people tickets and putting them in jail, where if you had those conversations, you understood what those needs were that needed to be met, you would have less panhandlers because you were. And it's hard because I feel that we as a society have really gone towards quick solutions that don't actually equal the best results. Yeah.
There are a couple themes that come up over and over again in my therapy with others, and this conversation just makes me think of two of them, right? And I try to boil things down into short things that people can remember that are going to be stuck in their head so they can replay them. and remember them, right? And one of them is let's be curious, right? Let's be curious about yourself and how you see the world. Let's be curious about how your partner or whoever you're having conflict with, how do they see the world, right? And let's validate their perspective. We don't have to agree,
right,
but you can at least validate and be curious about why they do what they do and why they see the world the way they do, because we all have a history and different experiences that guide us through our different decisions. And then the other part is permission, right? If we can be curious about ourselves and others and give each other permission to make mistakes, permission to try something new, permission to wear a different hat, then we allow the people that we're interacting with to explore new roles and try new things, as opposed to us trying to force other people into a box and rigid behaviors, and because it makes us feel comfortable, right? Like,
yeah. And I don't know. Yeah. I think one day, as long as everybody keeps doing this kind of work, that we'll come out in a better place.
I hope so. Because I believe that at the core, we're all good, right? Yeah. We're just trying to protect ourselves or other people. Like even the fear-based thing is we're still connecting with other people, right? We're just connecting in an unhealthy way. We're fulfilling that need of belonging, and power and control by aligning against whoever or whatever. But now I have my people, I have my teammates, right? Mm-hmm. We're all aligned in this thing.
Yeah.
So it's fulfillment through, you can argue healthy or unhealthy means, but
I don't like it. We were actually just talking to Dr. Marty Becker, and he is a veterinarian, America's veterinarian, and he created fear-free veterinary practice, where and I love it because exactly what we're talking about, really about diving into, let's not make it easy. Like, that's what they used to do, is just when you need to check a cat's mouth, you just hold the cat down and you rip open its mouth and you check it, and now they're looking at ways that you can make things more comfortable and more, like how do you, because it's stressful on the owner and stressful on the cat.
Right. You're watching.
But I love it because it's taking a deeper dive into the greater understanding of just the welfare of the pet, the owner. And I'm hoping that, when you look at this is happening, we've got a movement going in sheltering that's helping with this. He has a fear-free sheltering. We have the veterinary world looking into it, and I'm hoping that there's this effect that's happening in the world where more people are paying attention to all of this, where we might see. I also believe that when it gets really bad, it means it's about to get a whole lot better.
I appreciate that.
Eternal
the pendulum
optimist
swing.
here.
Yeah.
I do think it. I think it's any time in my life that I have had things that were absolutely horrible and rotten and challenging, and I wanted to hide under a rock, it always meant that I was going through some kind of a growth that would lead me to better times.
Yeah.
So I just have to think that it's true for everyone.
I have several experiences in my life where I find that that's true. Yeah. So I think there's merit in that perspective.
Hope.
But I was just thinking about that sort of veterinary practice, right? So, you and I were talking about mirror neurons.
Yeah.
A week or two ago about just the premotor cortex that gets kicked on when we're watching somebody do something, and that's where a lot of learning behavior comes from, and empathy, right? And so if we are watching our pets go through some examination and being sort of like ratcheted open, the look in their mouth or something, it just makes me think about we wouldn't do that to each other if you went to go see a doctor and
you hope not.
Let me see your mouth and just so our ability to feel or empathize with our pets as they're going through these practices, it turns something on in our own brains of sadness and fear and angst for our pets, and therefore can see how that would affect the owner.
Yeah. Like if anybody's listening to this and they're wondering, like, what can I do today to create a better world? I feel like the power of laughing, smiling, not being quick to judge, and just like smile at someone, wave at them, like that has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And even the experience in the vet clinic, what is that person going to feel like when they leave that clinic? Probably drained and not their best self. But if we can continue to work on just creating more positive interactions with all of us. I know I could keep going forever because I have this other thought that I'm wondering about. We have the tendency to want to get ya. Right? Like, I remember when I was in high school, I would pride myself on being quick-witted and, I told that person off. Got him, And that there's I think a high you get from you're filled with, I don't know, like endorphins because someone has maybe come at you or they parked their car, they came like behind you and you get out and you're able to tell them something and you're like, I got that person, and you call everybody saying, you could heard my zinger. And but what I know I've experienced is instead of coming at somebody like that, if I take a moment and I respond in a more positive way, in a more happy way, the response I get back makes me feel a whole lot better than I would have. But what's the desire in us to win? To Mike, am I saying that right?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and I think a lot of people listening to this, and myself, I can relate to it. How many times have you had a conversation with somebody that was lost for words in the moment, and they're thinking back to some interaction and said, I wish I would have said this, or if I was to go back in time, I know what I would say now. Yeah. And there, I can think of maybe one or two times in my life where I did think of that in the moment, and I did say it. And having actually accomplished that and remembered that, it didn't feel good.
Right.
The regret of looking back on a situation, say, I wish I could have, should have, would have, but in most of the time we're just trying to fumble through, to get through the experience and end it. But when I actually did say what I wish I said, I probably regretted that more.
Yeah.
And the times where I have been able to muster some degree of strength to say the kinder or the least nasty thing I could think of, I guess. I wasn't necessarily doing it for the other person, but I was doing it for me, knowing that I would be less likely to. I'm not going to regret this moment, and I acted with integrity. Yeah. And in part, maybe it had to do with respect for the other person, but usually there's just so much emotion right there that I'm just thinking, how do I act with some degree of integrity and not add another notch of things I will regret later in life, and whether or not that's the healthiest perspective, but I think that's been helpful for me to be able to think about how can I feel good about this moment.
But I feel like it takes a lot more, we again pride ourselves on or put our support into people who are quick-witted and say the mean thing, and comedies and all of that kind of train you to do it. But I think it takes a lot more strength and ability to pause and not say. Like, I was on the phone with somebody the other day, and there's only really one person that gets me truly fired up on a regular basis. And what I wanted to say was so big in my head that I feel like I had to get off the phone because I couldn't formulate any other thoughts than the one that wanted to come out of my mouth so bad that I said, I'm sorry, I have to go. And I hung up because I knew that if I said it, I would regret it and it wouldn't feel good, and that it was much better to not let it come out. But man, is it hard.
Yeah.
But it is good. It's good to be able to have the self-control to not, you don't want to hurt people. Well, I appreciate that you've taken the time. I'm positive that we will do this again. I do want to encourage anyone that is watching or listening that if you have questions for Dr. Wassif, just send us a message because we will be getting together with him again. So thank you for taking the time to do this. It's been a lot of fun. I'm sorry if I went on a bunch of tangents. I can't help myself. It's just all too interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.
Thank you for listening to People Are Animals Too, Darn It. You can send your questions or feedback to mandy@peopleareanimals2.com. MANDY@peopleareanimals2.com.